Welcome to Beyond Her Campus, celebrating 15 years. I'm Julianne Scriven, the Community Director at Her Campus, and we're excited to bring you this inspiring episode of our limited series podcast celebrating 15 years of Her Campus. In this series, we catch up with some of our most successful alumni, from news anchors and content creators to authors and mental health advocates. These women have incredible stories to share. Get ready for an insightful conversation filled with inspiration and advice. Let's jump in. Rachel, thank you so much for joining Beyond Her Campus, celebrating 15 years. I have been so excited to record your episode of the podcast because you and I have worked very briefly together through Her Campus Media and through your company, Metronome. I want to start there. Tell us all about Metronome. It is a consulting firm specializing in professional development and so in line with the Her Campus mission. Tell us about what inspired you to launch your own consulting firm and step away from it being a passion into a full-time role.
Yeah, so I'm so excited to be here, talk all things talent development, leadership, career growth. It's the most fun topic. So I'm excited to be here with you. So Metronome was founded several years ago after lots of years of working in the talent development space. And it is a firm that does a number of different things within talent development. So we do one-on-one coaching, group coaching, facilitation of different offsites, workshops, experiences for teams. And then training. So training leaders and teams on behaviors and skills that they want to improve. So that's sort of what we do. It came about after lots of years of working in-house. I was at Harry's for about a decade, and we can talk more about the Harry's experience. But today, Metronome exists to support leaders and teams in doing their best work.
I want to ask because there is such a need for this type of role, right? Where somebody could be even listening to this podcast or within their own career journey and feeling like, okay, I have almost plateaued and I might know where I need to improve, but I don't know exactly where I need to improve. Can you tell us what kind of topics do you coach in, and how have you found coaching to be so effective for these people, either in one-on-one or group?
Yeah, I think the fun part about my job is that when it comes to development, everyone is on their own journey. So everyone has something different that is hard for them, that's a roadblock for them. And everyone has different goals and end states. So some people know exactly what it is that they want to be when they grow up. Some people are still defining that. Some people might know their 1-year plan, 2-year plan, 5-year plan. Some people are totally allergic to the idea of having a plan at all. And so why I think coaching is such a helpful tool is that it is, by definition, individualized and bespoke. So instead of just applying some sort of standard formula to this is what every career should look like, or this is what every leader should be, instead, I get to sit down with like you, Julianne, and say, okay, tell me about you. What is hard for you right now? What is interesting for you right now? When are you motivated? When are you engaged? When are you disengaged? And we can customize a path for you that feels like it is tailored to your own values, goals, and interests, really.
That's so important because I think a lot of people get into a job, whether it's at their dream company or maybe it's their dream title or whatever it is, and it has a piece of their role, I almost feel like universally, where it might not feel like they can be as engaged. And so for that, do you offer advice for those people who are like, okay, I'm right where I want to be, I'm right on my path, but this area of my role I'm really struggling with? Can you get as specific as that, or is it just a little bit broader, especially as a coach who's formulating so individually?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to loop you in on a little secret. And this is now a secret that anyone who's listening has access to. So I realize it's not totally a secret.
An exclusive secret to the Her Campus pod.
Great. Well, here's the secret. Coaching is not actually that complicated. And I will give you the sort of like TLDR, the too long didn't read, around how to be a good coach. It's simple but hard to do. And coaching as a process can be applied to any kind of challenge, big or small. It could be about your whole career overall. It could be about what should I do for dinner tonight? So the same sort of like principle applies. And I'm going to tell you what it is. It's helping someone articulate their goal. It's helping them understand what is getting in the way of their goal. It's helping them brainstorm options. And then it's committing them to an action or a next step.
I was just thinking how when you say it like that, it seems like, okay, great, I have this checklist and I will just do it. But getting into the details of that checklist, I'm sure, is where the bigger challenge and maybe the fun comes in for you.
Totally. And there's a lot beneath the surface at every step there. So it sounds simple, like just articulate your goal. But as you actually get into it, there are a lot of things that can get in the way of someone being able to clearly articulate their goal. They might not know. They might actually have sort of a subconscious goal that's different than their articulated goal. They might have multiple goals that are conflating and complicating the matter for them because there are lots of things that are important to them. It's a process of working with a coach who's really good at sort of teasing out all of those answers at every step of that process to help you unlock your own thinking or work. And so as it relates to dinner, it might be like, what's your goal for dinner? Like you think it's to order from the right restaurant, but when you get down to it, it's actually like you want to spend more quality time with your partner, or like you want something that is just easy because you've had a long day. And so when you work with a coach who's good at walking people through this process, you learn a lot about yourself and about what is my true objective here and what is really getting in the way. It might not be the first thing you think of or what you initially assume going into that conversation. And that's what I find so fun about my work is when people have those sort of like insights and aha moments where they're like, oh, it's not actually X, it's really Y. And then that unblocks them so that they can go out and do great things.
That is fascinating because, to use your dinner example, I think in so many instances we're almost accustomed to being like, well, of course, my goal is to just eat. Or in a career space, it's
Yeah.
my goal is to just get to the next salary advancement or to the next promotion. But I think you can almost unlock some of the creative spark, the delight in your day to day by finding out, like, okay, this is the exact goal, and have it be so much more specific than just like, okay, I have to eat or I have to get to my next promotion or whatever that is.
Totally. And it's a simple thing, but just asking yourself or working with a coach or a friend or whoever to just ask why. So you ask, okay, my goal is to get promoted. Cool. Why? Well, that could go very different directions if the why is because really compensation is really important. Maybe you had a kid or just
Mhm.
got a dog, and so you really want to feel financially stable. Maybe the why behind promotion is because you're more interested in the type of work that you can do at the next level. And so, really, it's about getting to do that type of work that's interesting. Or maybe it's because a certain title is really important to you. So, you could do exactly what you're doing. And if you just have that different title, that would sort of scratch the itch. And so, by understanding those deeper motivations and that deeper why, you're able to actually solve the right problem versus solving the wrong problem. If your goal is just to eat, dinner is going to be pretty easy. But my guess is that there's something going on beneath the surface that is making dinner a challenge. And so let's understand that before trying to solve the wrong problem.
That is fascinating advice, and I think something that everyone can almost jot down of understand your why and allow that to be a guiding force even in small day-to-day decisions, but translating it over into career, into relationship next steps, into bigger decisions like having a kid or getting a dog or any of those examples where you can understand the real motivation behind it. And it feels to me, again, this is advice I'm going to take and jot down, but it feels to me like when you understand your why, it might even tweak the way you're going about getting that promotion or getting to dinner to really understand what next steps make the most sense for you.
1,000%. I'll give you a real example of that. I was working with someone who wanted a promotion because she wanted more money. It was a compensation thing. Cool. That seems like you're at your why, but ask it one more time. Well, why is money important? Well, I want freedom in order to be able to feel like I don't have to work as much. Okay. So now I'm understanding a couple things about your values. I'm understanding compensation is important to you, but underlying that is the desire to have more time freedom. So when you ask why several times, it's like, oh, actually, yes, it is compensation. I'm not saying don't get a promotion. I'm not saying don't care about compensation. You're not going to feel fully satisfied until you address that root cause why, which is really about freedom of time. And how can we then get you that? and incorporate that freedom of time, which is sort of like a core underlying value, into everything you're doing so that you're not like waiting to retire until you can sort of like exercise that value or get that thing that's important to you. So I think you said it perfectly. Ask why and then ask why and why. It's almost like you're like a little kid who's like,
Yeah.
why is the sky blue? Because there's oxygen and water droplet. Like, well, why? Why? Ask it a bunch of times.
I love the idea of just always being childlike curious because I
Mhm.
think it allows for, on one hand, for us to have a little bit more fun, but I also love in this instance and in this example and in this conversation, allows you to get to know yourself and your goal and set yourself up for even better success. So I think like a huge learning for me is to just keep that childlike wonder, and it will just be so much more beneficial. You mentioned time, and the name of your company is Metronome. Tell us
Mhm.
how you came to the name of Metronome. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. It's gonna seem like I'm obsessed with keeping time, but I came up with a new metronome because one of my favorite leadership analogies is this idea that once you become a leader, so a people manager or even a step above that into like a true sort of like leader of a team, you go from playing an instrument in the orchestra to conducting the orchestra. So no longer are you responsible for doing the work. You're responsible for setting the vision for the work, for keeping pace, for sort of conducting to make sure that people are aligned and playing with the same rhythm on the same time. And a metronome is a tool that helps keep time. It's a tool that helps a conductor of an orchestra make sure that everyone is playing at the same pace on the same time. And so I liked the idea of metronome. Like we work with leaders to help them keep pace at time. A little bit of like a nod to that leadership analogy that I love.
I love that. And speaking of time, I think that there is a misconception on both ends here of what it means to be the founder and CEO of your own company. On one hand, I think that there's a misconception that they have tons of time. All their time is completely their own because it's their own company. Of course, their time is completely their own. All the way to the other side of that, where it is like they have their own company, they have to do everything, they have no waking minute to themselves. Give us the inside look at what it actually does mean to be a founder, to be a CEO. What does your day-to-day look like? Do you have a work-life balance? How do you strike that correctly, especially knowing that it is something you're so passionate about?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I can only speak from my own experience. So, this is not to say that every founder has the same experience that I have. And part of it is grounded in the business and the work that I do as well. But I sometimes say that I have the most freedom and the least freedom. So, I sometimes compare it to my husband who has a job. Like, he works at a company and he goes to work and he takes vacation. And when we had a baby, he took parental leave. Like, I don't have any of that. I define my own hours, the work I take on. I decide how much or how little I want to do. I set my own goals. And so what that means is that in some sense, I have a lot of freedom. I can work from anywhere I want. I can decide to block a day from meetings or reschedule clients. I can have a lot of freedom. But when I have committed to something, I have, like, the least amount of freedom. Like, when I'm running a workshop, I can't move that for anything. Like, when I've agreed to go to a client's offsite, there's no flexibility there, no built-in vacation time. I can't really call in sick. I'm always thinking about how to keep the trains running and keep the projects moving, and so I have a lot of freedom on one hand, but then on the other hand, like, once I've committed, I feel like I actually have very little. So it's just, like, a shift in mentality, and I personally am enjoying it. I think that it's nice to feel like you can control sort of like when and what you take on, but it's hard sometimes for sure. Like I mentioned parental leave, like I had a baby and like I'm still answering emails to make sure things are working. Maybe not days or hours, but like certainly weeks after she was born. Like on vacation, I don't feel like I'm ever fully unplugged because I care and because I want to keep things moving and running. So I think of it less as like work-life balance and more as work-life integration, where I do have some freedom and flexibility to make choices, but there are some aspects of my life and my schedule that are just really sort of ongoing or not stoppable after 5 p.m. or after Friday evening.
What advice would you give to listeners who are maybe in the early stages of their company or have just made it past maybe like that first year hurdle? What advice would you give to them?
I'll give you the advice that I need to sometimes take myself. So I would not say I have this fully figured out. But I think something I'm trying to learn and relearn is that there are highs and lows, peaks and valleys in a business cycle. And I need to be better, and so you should be better too, at riding that, like riding the highs and the lows. Like there are busy days and seasons, and there are lighter days and seasons. And I need to, I think, trust that when things are light, they're going to pick up. And when things are busy, they're going to slow down. And so when things are light, actually try to enjoy that versus feeling anxious about that or like on to the next thing. Because sometimes what happens is I'll swing the pendulum too far. So I'll have a light week and I'll have some extra time. And instead of just like going to the gym or taking a nap or reading a book or doing something for myself, I want to build my business pipeline and I want to reach out to that extra networking connection. And so then the next week, when things sort of renormalize, I'm not like overbooked because I've just committed myself to new projects or new meetings. And so my advice is to like trust the highs and the lows and trust that as long as you've sort of done the work to build the right foundation of your business, like if there's a slow day, if there's a slow week, just enjoy it. Don't try to fill it.
I think that's good advice for anybody, right? Even if you are working a classic 9 to 5, like your husband is, figuring out a way to enjoy both rounds of the wave, where it is slower, where it is a little bit more intense. And I think it just sets up your overall month and year for a little bit more positivity and a little bit more balance. I know you mentioned your decade-long career at Harry's. You were the customer experience associate, and by the time you left, you were the director of people and special projects. What are some of the factors that contributed to your longevity with a brand? It is almost unheard of to be with a brand for close to a decade now. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that, so first of all, like it wasn't even my first job and I was there for 10 years. But here we are. This is the 15th anniversary of her campus. So we know that it's been a minute. I think the reason why I was at Harry's for so long was because I had so many different roles in that time. It almost feels like every new position or job was a new chapter of that experience. So, yes, I was there for about a decade, but I was really shifting what I was thinking about. So, I started on the customer experience team, like literally answering phone calls, customer emails, talking to people who are happy or unhappy with their experience to try to improve that experience. And I only did that job for a couple months and then moved into a role as an executive assistant to Jeff and Andy, the co-founders of Harry's. I was their EA for about a year and a half, doing EA work plus like everything that needed to be done. Like the brand was like 6 months old at the time. So there was like a lot to be done. It was like setting up accounts payable systems and leading an engagement survey and planning offsites and just lots of stuff. The EA role transitioned into a chief of staff role where I was supporting them on business process and internal and external communications and special projects and different things that supported the executive office broadly and sort of their leadership and management team. And then I was able to transition into learning and development. I was always interested in the people side of things. And so moved from chief of staff to director of learning and development and then stayed within the people world for a while. I was able to go part-time as I was building my own business, Metronome, which was a really nice transition for me. And then eventually said my goodbyes, but still have regular conversations with the Harry's team. And we're planning work together at some point next year. So still consider myself like a friend of the brand. But I think to answer your question, I was there for so long because I was able to do so many different things. And I would encourage listeners to think about their current organization as more like a playground for like what can you get to do there and not assume that you actually have to go somewhere else or get some other kind of training or certification to be able to do a different kind of work. I personally found that if you're at the right kind of organization and you have some good social capital and good relationship, you have some leeway to say, hey, I want to take this on or to sort of go above and beyond or outside of the scope of your immediate role so that you can get a ton of experience internally and not necessarily have to look externally for that.
How did you advocate for yourself or for those role changes? I think that it is so common to be in a situation where you're like, oh, I think that I could stay here, but maybe I just need to find a different job to be happier. So how did you advocate for yourself and for what you were interested in doing and learning?
It's a great question. And every role I had, I sort of came to it differently. So the customer experience role, I just applied. That was my first job on the team. I was then sort of tapped to do the EA role. It wasn't something I necessarily thought I wanted even, but I was sort of open to it and sort of pulled into that role. The chief of staff role was definitely a push. So I advocated for that and I can talk more about it, but I essentially like made a pitch deck that I shared with Jeff and Andy that was like, here's what I'm doing today. Here's the value I could be adding in this new role. Here's what would be in scope. Here's why it's interesting and important and impactful for the business. Let me do it. And so I had to like really push and advocate for that. And then the learning and development role was a little bit of an in between where that was an internal role that they were opening up. And so I applied and went through an internal hiring process for that. So I was able to transition differently, different times. A couple of thoughts on this. One is that I think you always need to do your core job well, and that should always be the first priority in order to open doors for yourself. So if you're an EA and you want to move on to a role on marketing or the people team or the ops team, the best thing you can do is be the best possible executive assistant. That opens up doors because high performers get promoted, high performers get pulled into things, high performers have access to opportunity. So do your core job really well and then make known your aspirations or your intentions beyond that. And I don't think that has to mean having an actual job description or concrete ask ready. I think it means starting to talk to decision makers, like starting with your own manager about the types of things you like. So you might not know, like, hey, I want to start my own business in talent development consulting. I had no idea that is where I would end up, but I knew I'm interested in people and teams. And so keep giving me projects or opportunities or exposure as it relates to people and teams, and then see where that leads you until you start to move closer and closer in the direction that is most interesting to you.
In so many instances, I feel like I find myself thinking to advocate for what I want, I have to have everything figured out. I have to be completely ready to take on like whatever that next role would look like. But I think that you make a really good point that learn about the areas that you like. And that is an area of advocation, right? You can talk to your manager, talk to whoever on the team is able to support you in just like, I'm not totally ready to move completely into this space. I want to learn more. I want to get a grounding underneath me and get my feet wet in it. And I think that is really helpful for any employee at any level, especially because interests change and what you want to learn shifts a little bit as you're growing as a person and growing in your career.
I think that's exactly right. And so, like, a very practical question we should all be asking ourselves is not like, what do I want to do next or what do I want to be when I grow up, but what's something I'm curious about? Where do I want to lean in and grow? What would be something interesting to have done by this time next year? What is interesting for me, or what's an area of the business that I want to learn more about right now? And I think by asking those questions from a place of curiosity versus just having some sort of like a rigid conception of a career ladder growth plan takes a lot of pressure off. It's like, I don't need to know. I just know what I'm curious about, or I know what motivates me, or I know a project that I want to get more involved in. And I think it allows you to grow without feeling like you need to have it all figured out.
We briefly already started talking about her campus, so I want to bring it in. Tell us a little bit about when you stumbled upon the Her Campus chapter and what your undergrad experience was like in her campus.
Yeah. So I started college in 2008. And so I was there pretty early in the Her Campus journey. I attended Barnard College, which is the Women's College of Columbia. And I was really interested in all things editorial, writing, English. I was an English literature major. I had internships at magazines. My embarrassing fun fact is that I was one of 17 magazines freshman 15, which is like a thing that's definitely going to date me.
It was the coolest thing ever.
It was cool. So I was interested in the editorial world. And so after the freshman 15 year, I interned at 17 over one summer. And I think that was how I originally connected with Stephanie. And this was when Her Campus was just starting. They were just reaching out to folks at college campuses around the country. And so it was an excuse to write, to publish, and to have an editor, really. And so I worked closely with Steph for sophomore, junior, and senior year. I think it was like 2 or 3 solid years of writing lots of articles and stories and listicles, and some of them were more sort of like editorial. Some of them were more like listy, fun. But yeah, I wrote for her campus for a number of years and really loved it. It was fun.
I know that you were at our very first ever Her Campus reunion in June. So you took your Her Campus experience, came to our New York City 15-year, and we were so excited to have it and see so many people just from every area and every time period, really, of Her Campus. You facilitated a workshop about identifying your personal genius. For those of us who couldn't attend and were so sad to miss it, tell us about that phrase. What does personal genius mean, and how can we strive to be a personal genius?
Yeah. So I didn't make up this framework, but I really like using it because it just really resonates with me. So I'll share it with you all. And yeah, curious if it resonates with you too. So the idea is that we are good at some things, we like some things, and the trick is to find the intersection of what we're really good at and what brings us a lot of energy and what we really like. So there are sort of these like 4 different zones. There's the zone of incompetence, which is stuff that you're not good at and you don't like. Stuff for me like finance stuff. I'm not good at investor research, nor do I like it. So that's my zone of incompetence. There's the zone of competence, which is stuff that you're good enough at, but you don't particularly like. Like you're not great. It's just you can get by, you're competent. It's not awesome. You don't love it. There's the zone of excellence. This is the zone that you are really good at these things, but they don't really light you up. Like that you're not really excited at the end of the day of working on these types of things. So like project management and organization for me, I'm pretty organized. I'm pretty type A. I can run a good project. I can Gantt chart with the best of them, but I don't love it. And then there's the zone of genius, which is where you ideally want to be spending more and more of your time. This is the intersection of the things you're really good at and the things that bring you a lot of energy. And for a lot of people, the trap is that they end up in their zone of excellence, not their zone of genius. They end up doing a lot of the things they're really good at because, shocker, they're really good at it. So people keep giving them that type of work.
Right.
But it's not the stuff that lights them up and that really is where they want to be engaging and spending energy and time. And so that can lead to burnout. That can lead to just not your best performance or work. It could lead to you feeling stuck in your career. So it's a framework I like to think about whenever I'm feeling stuck at work or in my career. I'm like, okay, how much time am I spending in my zone of incompetence or competence? Hopefully not a ton of time there. But how much time am I spending in my zone of excellence, the stuff I'm good at but don't love, versus my zone of genius, the stuff that really lights me up and I'm really good at it because that's where I, Rachel, am going to be able to deliver the most possible impact and enjoy it in the process.
So, to identify those areas, do you essentially sit down and mark by task, almost like a little time audit of what you're doing day to day? How do you kind of discover that, oh my God, I am in this zone and I need to be moving over?
It's a great question. So, one exercise that I like that you can try, let me know how it goes, is to think about some of your peak performance experiences and notice patterns across those moments of peak performance. So, starting in like middle school, like when were the moments in your life truly like where you felt like you were operating at your best? For me, examples are being a tour guide in my college, like walking prospective students around campus and talking to potential students and their families and showing them this place that I really loved. It was just the best. I was sort of like performing. I could make all my bad jokes. I was sharing information about this thing I loved. It was just like I was at my peak. I got paid to do it, but I would have done it for free. Like it was just like a really fun peak experience. And so on, like go throughout your life and your career. I know people who talk about like there's being on their sorority recruitment or a moment at work or on a sports team or something working, writing for her campus. These are like experiences, whatever they are, where you feel like you're at your best. And then try to map at least 3 of those examples of when you were at your best and notice patterns across them. And chances are good, something about those peak experiences utilized your zone of genius, right? So for me, if my zone of genius is speaking publicly to people about work and life, I don't know, I'm just sort of making this up right now, but if that's my zone of genius, then yeah, I sort of see that in the tour guide experience. And so how can I do more of that? How can I speak more publicly to people about their work and their life? And this podcast is an example of that. And there might be other ways that I can bring more of that into my life. And so that's one way. And the other way, just briefly, is what you're suggesting. It's sort of like an energy audit where you list out all of the tasks that you do in a given day. I like to literally use Post-it notes. I'm a big Post-it note girly. So one task per Post-it note. And then I map them. So I'll say, okay, dealing with my invoicing and accounting, that's my zone of competence at best. Leading a workshop, that's maybe my zone of excellence. Speaking on this podcast, that's my zone of genius. I'm high energy, high interest. So you can start to do it at the task level, or you could just ask yourself questions like, when have I felt most engaged and energized at work and in life? What do other people think that I do best? There are lots of sort of ways in to the framework, but I hope that those are some helpful suggestions of how you can start reflecting.
I think they're so helpful, and I want to tie it back into the idea of childhood curiosity and the asking why. And I think that by getting into those experiences that you have, it's so easy to discover new things because essentially everything that you're doing is new to you. And finding what was so fun and what did I live to do, and bringing that example into your workplace and finding out how can I get that feeling back. And so I really love the idea of going even back to childhood to look for that sense of wonder and that sense of purpose and that sense of I am not only good at this, but I am excited to do this. And this is something that I need to do because I feel the most like myself when I'm doing it.
I really love that. A fun question could be to ask your parents or whoever spent a lot of time with you when you were a kid, what was I like as a kid? And pull some of those stories and reflect on those stories too. I think that's such a beautiful connection you drew. I'm going to use that. And I'm thinking about my own childhood. There's a famous story in my family where my kindergarten teacher got mad at me because I was pretending to be the teacher and during free period, led class. And now I get to lead workshops. And I never fully thought about the connection. But as you were saying that, I'm oh, maybe I was exactly the same when I was 6 years old.
I think that's wonderful because it almost is you were manifesting it since your childhood. And I think that's just such a fun memory to share. So thank you for sharing it on the podcast. Rachel, I have loved having you on the podcast. It has been fascinating, from learning about personal genius to kind of reimagining childhood wonder in the workplace. So many different pieces we covered here. What advice would you have for your 21-year-old self?
I think to relax a little bit and to cool it. I think I'm an ambitious person. I wanted to take on a lot. I think I'm wise beyond my years. I'm an old soul in some ways. And so I was eager to get to the next thing, to get to the next stage, to be farther along than I was as a young person. And I think there's a lot of joy in just being in the moment and having the patience and the trust that you're going to get there. It's going to be okay. Just enjoy the ride.
We have 2 more rapid fire questions before we can jump off. But what is something you are looking forward to?
I am looking forward to my daughter's first birthday. She's turning 1 next month, and it's on the personal front that we've almost made it a year of keeping this little peanut alive, and she's the best, and it's a lot of fun, and so I'm excited for her birthday.
What a wonderful thing to look forward to. Lastly, tell listeners where they can find you, where they can keep up with your work.
So you can actually just send me an email if you're ever interested, rachel@metronome.consulting. I'd love to hear from you. You can also follow my newsletter. So I write a biweekly newsletter that summarizes a lot of the interesting stuff that I'm reading, learning, thinking about that's coming up in my coaching. It's all about leadership, development, professional growth. I'm on Substack, so you can find me there. Or you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm not always great on the socials. You'll catch me on a good day or bad day. But if you need me, email me or follow my Substack. I'd love to continue the conversation there.
I really want to recommend your newsletter. I am on the list. I love receiving it. It has been so helpful. I forward it to my team pretty regularly as well, and it has been forwarded to me by other folks in Her Campus Media. So I really do want to emphasize that it is an important newsletter to subscribe to no matter where you're at in your career. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond Her Campus, celebrating 15 years.
Thank you for having me.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond Her Campus, celebrating 15 years. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you loved this episode, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave a review. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more incredible stories from our amazing alums. Until then, HCXO!